On behalf of the Friendswood Library, I just wanted to welcome you out tonight, and just say on behalf of the library how honored we are to have Larry Thomas and Chip Dameron here to read with us. It was back in June, I think we first emailed and arranged this, so couldn't be more thrilled that they made it out tonight. And then I just wanted to introduce David Cowan real quickly. He is going to act as host for tonight's event. David Cowan is president of Gulf Coast Poets. He's also a fine writer and poet on his own behalf. His book in 2015, The Madness of Empty Spaces, is fantastic. And he just informed me that he has a new book coming out called The 7 Yards of Sorrow, due out in September. So if you would join me in welcoming our host, Mr. David Cowan.
Thank you. I won't mess with that. Thank you very much. Thank you for all going here. For those of you who don't know the Gulf Coast Poets, several people here are founding members, Mary Margaret Carlisle and Leo, right, the Leo Walsh right there. A wonderful group, and we're carrying forward traditions and the love that Mary brought to it and her founding group. We have, I think, close to 60 members now, all together between the lifetime and the regular members, something like that, and a lot of honorary members. We're always excited when we get an honorary member that read for us as a feature reader come back and we get a chance to host them. And we have that tonight, and Larry Thomas. We're very excited about that, and we'll talk to him. Which one of you two have flipped the coin? And
Chip goes first.
Yeah, you go first. Okay, so I'll go through that. And I'm excited about Chip because Chip Dameron lives in Brownsville, Texas. And as I introduced myself, he knows my name because my mother taught with him at Texas Southmost College. So I'm very, very excited to meet him and excited to hear him read. And Brownsville is a very quirky place. I always liken it to, whenever you have an area where the rivers and everything converge, the silt and the filters of life capture all sorts of things. And even down there, I think D.H. Lawrence's last wife, Frida, is rumored to have lived down there and fished amongst the different fishing camps and things when she brought her latest lovers and came down. So it's quite an eclectic little area. It's a wonderful place. Good place for poetry, and a lot of the poetry I have written is based on memories of Brownsville. Some fond, and of course, not always fond, but that's okay. That's what poets do. So Chip Dameron, and I'm very pleased. Charles is actually his given name. Charles, and he goes by Chip. He's an author of a travel book and 7 collections of poetry, including 2 published in 2015, Waiting for Etcher by Lamar University Press, and Drinking from the River, New and Selected Poems, 1975 to 2015 by Wings Press. His poems and essays on contemporary writers have appeared in the Mississippi Review, the Southwestern American Literature, San Pedro River Review, Puerto de Sol, Hayden's Ferry Review, New Orleans Review, New Texas, and many other journals and anthologies, as well as publications in Canada, Ireland, Nigeria, India, China, Thailand, and New Zealand. And Dameron has co-edited 2 literary magazines, Thicket, and one I'm going to butcher, the Chachalaka Poetry Review, and served on the editorial board of 4 others. He is a 2-time nominee for Pushcart Prize in poetry. He's a member of the Texas Institute of Letters, and he's a professor emeritus in the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And he lives and writes in Brownsville, Texas. So please enjoy the poetry of Chip.
Thank you very much, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to meet a number of the Gulf Coast poets who are actively engaged in the craft and are hosting the event tonight. I did have the pleasure of, when I moved to Brownsville with my wife Joan in 1985, of finding that one of the members of the faculty at Texas Southmost College, where I started, was Virginia Cowan, a wonderful teacher and enthusiast of literature. And so I know other sons in the Cowan family, but it's a pleasure to meet David tonight. I'd like to start with a short poem that seems appropriate here as March is moving along. The poem is called Spring Again. Slow enough to find an old path to a place that's been dry too long. Time enough to wonder what the rain means. Slippery counterpoint to mockingbird talk. Wet enough to wish new planted roots away through mulched beds of clay. Wait here for what you can't remember yet, how the green leaves turn into birds. Some years ago, my wife and I had an opportunity to spend about a month, I guess it was, one summer on an island called Moria, which is a sister island to Tahiti. And Joan and members of her family actually have relatives there, and it was quite delightful. We stayed with relatives. And so this poem, kind of a narrative poem coming out of time there and experience there, it's called Fishing in Moria. In the lengthening afternoon, after the clouds have massed above the emerald peaks, peppered everything wet, and moved on, there is time to enter the lagoon and motor slowly past the darkened clots of coral in the shallows. Ahead, the waves bash the reef. Behind, roofs are disappearing into the slope's omnivorous volcanic vegetation. Anchoring at the reef's inner edge, we cross its pocked plateau, brace against the wash from those detonations just ahead, and cast crosswise into the swells at the head of the pass, where jackfish congregate. We sling our lures parabolically into the wallowing troughs between waves, then jerk and crank, dragging our hooks through an undulating mystery. Arm-wearied, many casts later, I find the hook harden and watch the rod quiver, then steepen toward this sudden prize. The fish roils the surface once, twice, as I reel in, staggered briefly by a boiling surge. When the jack is nearby and nearly beaten, my friend lifts the line expertly, grips the fish in his calloused hand, and broadly smiles. C'est bon, a big fish, he pronounces. The jack lashes its tail vainly, its pastel scales a shimmer in the declining light. When we return to the waiting boat, my 2-foot jack, stringered, flaps in the air. As dusk comes on, we angle back toward the shore, motor humming, happy, a fine fish for tomorrow's table, taken from the sea through much exertion, luck, and surprise. As we glide through the shallows, I wonder what hook I am on, what strike will leave me gulping hard for air. Thank you. Among my most recent poems over the past maybe year and a half, I've got a group that are kind of unusual. They're based on some family history, and it happens that my father, who grew up in West Texas, had a twin, and whose name was Carol. My dad's name was Charles, and Carol died at about 6 months of age, and so my father really never knew anything about his twin. And of course, we grew up without having that uncle, but but he actually, he was an uncle of mine, but he only lived to be 6 months old. So it's sort of a strange circumstance. But I was reflecting one day about that and sort of wondering what he might be thinking if he could think about all of this, having lived such a short time, and as compared to my father's rather long life. And so I've got a series of poems. I'll read 3 or 4 of them from the series, and they're in Uncle Carol's voice. The series is called Uncle Carol Speaks, and I'll read the head note. Uncle Carol was born on July 13th, 1919, and died, 4 months later. It's not 6. 4 months later, on November 15th, 1919. His twin, Charles, died 91 years later on March 13th, 2011. And the first poem will provide a little background on what it was that led to Uncle Carol's death. It's called On the Epidemic of 1918-1919. As we both got sicker that fall, Mother prayed and Dad swore at the doctor, weary from sick bed after sick bed and days of dying, shaking his head slowly as if the lamplight had brought on a migraine, and later, as the flu burned through the hollows of my little body, the miracle they hoped for quenched your thirst, and I was left alone forever. They say that when twins in Africa become malnourished, only one develops kwashiorkor, listless and cantaloupe-bellied, like a green pecos melon severed from the vine, rotting in a field. I'd like to give that child a bowl of mother's mashed pinto beans, though they couldn't bring me back. Here's one called Letter from the Void. None of you will ever know which of us swam out first, sputtering into the alien air, giving up forever the gifts of the womb for a tactile world of uncertain hopes and certain death. We were happiest floating in our infinite universe, neither hot nor cold, fingerlings so fearless in our twinning. You'd probably pick Charlie, your father, Mr. Up at 5 a.m., Mr. Always active and organized, as if he'd found his purpose sooner than I had, as if he'd pushed ahead to get the edge on me by those few minutes, so when the flu finally found our dusty Texas town that fall, he'd be the toughened one, the favored one who stayed on, the only son that would matter. How do you know I wasn't first, the more curious one, risking all comfort to cry my shock out loud, telling Charlie just what lay ahead, and he, ever cautious, had held back as long as he could, letting me suffer in my scrawny, lonely nakedness until he had to face his future too. But neither of us can tell you now, and so, if you should care, you'll have to imagine which of us wanted to be first, and why, and how that shaped what you've become. Thank you. And here's one called At the River. When heat finally eased in September, we'd go down to Spring Creek late in the afternoon, pecan trees giving good shade, Mother holding one of us and Sister Babe the other. And though we couldn't swim then, bundled along the bank, we watched the current ripple on toward the bridge, free and easy like the lonesome crows that crossed the yard all morning, calling out to a big empty sky. On toward dark, they'd take us home, a spare frame house letting hot air leak out of wide open windows, and we'd commence to crying then, our bellies empty and sorrowful, begging Mother for early dinner, our steady sucking turning time into its own glowing fullness. And then Babe would slowly rock us in Dad's homemade double cradle until the lamplight flickered and failed, and we drifted like leaves into the undulating waves of the night, a short dying before the long and final one. And I'll read one more from this group. And this is called At the Sherwood Cemetery. They were both born in Sherwood, Texas, which is about, I think, some maybe 20, 25 miles west of San Angelo. And if you look it up today on Wikipedia, the entry says it's a ghost town. There actually are some people living around, maybe, 70 or 80 folks in the area, but I mean, as far as being a town, it's really not an active one. There is a courthouse there, which is interesting. It was the county seat of that county back at the turn of the last century, but not many are there now. At any rate, this poem, there's a cemetery there, and this is called At the Sherwood Cemetery. So you've come to this graveyard to find a headstone with my name chiseled out. Listen to the windmill inside the entrance, creaking and groaning all day and night, and you'll likely learn as much as you will by walking up and down these rows, though there are other Damerons about and even a section of Millses, my mother's people. I should have been buried here back then. Chilly day in November, small cheap casket, some flowers, a couple of dozen relatives, but where exactly is anybody's guess? See those flat chipped stones with rocks a body's length away or long arms? Lots of these dead are lost to language now, the wind their only inscription. Maybe you can hear my name if you listen closely, but you'll never ever know where my small bones lie, forever apart from my twin brother, buried 90 years later with a fine bronze marker in big D, so people won't forget him like they have me. Thank you. I'm going to read a couple of poems that are based on reacting to works of art, and lots of poets, I guess, have found inspiration in the visual arts, and I'm in good company. Larry Thomas is also a fellow enthusiast of the visual arts, and Larry, in fact, has a wonderful small book, a chapbook called Art Museums that I would encourage you to take a look at sometime. I wrote, some years back, I wrote a series of poems in reaction to paintings by Pablo Picasso, whom I'd spent a lot of time, whose work I'd spent time looking at, mostly in large volumes and so forth, although I've seen a few of his in museums over the years as well. So I'll read two of these, and this is called Portrait of a Painter After El Greco, 22/2/1950. The original, still hanging in Franco's Seville, comes to him through print or photograph. Sharp, somber, and elusive, the face becomes a cubist mask with cat whiskers and a firm jaw. The fingers writhe like silver snakes and nip at all the brushes. Poised like a persistent cat with a lush silver collar, the painter contemplates his kill. And then one other one called Corrida, which was painted in 1957, and my poem about that painting goes like this. The impeccable strokes of a Zen masterpiece, the stark congruity of a Rorschach blot, bull, horse, and picador exploding with energy, the lance sinking into the bull's back impales the picador. The rearing horse, catalyst in this confrontation, will get its belly slashed. Nothing remains unbloodied. Nothing remains safe in the heat of the corrida and the terrible black ink of blood, froth, and sweat that gives the snow-white page its frozen beauty. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I did have a career teaching literature and composition to students who had some interest or little interest in both of those subjects, and so language and of course again I've been writing poems for a long time. Language is something that we all are involved with, and so one day I ended up with this poem, which is about language, and it's called Place of Alphabets. Who knows how we came to be awake in this place of alphabets where the T's provide a bit of shade and the R's all rush downhill, searching for an S and the promise of plurality. Close your eyes and listen to the clock deep in your vowels, where tick and tock tell it all. The air is for stringing a song. The wind is for twisting it around the contours of our lives, where we sort through the endless cackle of consonants. The other side of the coin, so to speak, is the world of mathematics, which is another human construct that helps us most of the time function in this world as we're trying to get places and understand things that have mathematical dimensions to them. And so I came up with this poem in reflection. It's called Mathematics of Meaning. He got so caught in his tangle of angles that he couldn't keep from growing more obtuse as he spoke in circles about triangles, and every hypotenuse in the room missed his point. As David was saying, I have lived now in Brownsville for just over 30 years, and we do have, I know all along the Gulf Coast we have an opportunity to enjoy the migration of birds, both fall and spring, I guess particularly in the spring when they're flying across the Gulf and sort of collapse once they hit shore for a couple of days and to re-energize themselves before continuing. Those can be special times, and so this is a poem which, another spring poem called During Spring Migration that I wrote after an event that I experienced. And again, you know, there are multiple kinds of migrations that occur, and this poem includes at least two of them in the process of unfolding. And it goes like this. We found a good place to find birds. On this side of the road, an oxbow lake pond harbors heron, osprey, grebe. On that side, invisible calls pop out from a meadow of reeds. Around the bend, among the scrub and native trees, we count warblers, kingbirds, buntings, orioles, a cuckoo, new life birds for some. Not quite like a fallout on the island, trees full of birds, worn down from crossing the Gulf, but keen and companionable. As we bird back toward our cars, we spot a Border Patrol van parked athwart the road, a couple of agents at work among three Mexicans sitting in the dirt who crossed the river again this morning. Thank you. We've got a lot of grackles in South Texas. A lot of people hate grackles. I suppose they're nuisance birds, and if I were a farmer, I probably would hate grackles too, but I'm not a farmer. And actually, I find them interesting to look at, listen to, and they are striking birds. This is a poem that I wrote and dedicated to a friend of mine down there who enjoys doing some birding and so forth. We used to talk about birds a lot. And the poem is called Man Who Lives Among Birds. This it's for Jose Marcelo Garza, who has been one of my colleagues in teaching literature and composition for many years. And the poem goes like this. Friend, when great-tailed grackles float down and strut around my yard, eyes imperious, a flicker, I think of you at your house, still by window or porch, the wet birds preening among the sprinkler heads, their glint of midnight blue sparking your day. In class, after you've read a poem by Frost or Dickinson, a bird stands fixed against the page, and no one knows what sound it makes or where it would be going, could it go at all. Then someone sees a word begin to flutter, a line begin to rise, a black shape in search of itself, its eye on fire, its beak searing all sense as it shatters a window and speeds into the dark that waits outside. Thank you. Here's another poem that's set in South Texas, and I've got a reference in here to Walt. Thinking of Walt Whitman, who's I admire his work very much. Also admire Emily Dickinson's work very much. I think of him as a grandmother and grandfather of modern American poetry. Two wonderful 19th century American writers, very different in so many ways. Their poetic styles are just remarkably different, but both of them had genius in their work. This is called Kingdom on Earth. The ducks are lined up along the Resaca, their quacks as crisp as the light that lures them into motion. They're waddle in cahoots with the colors and sounds that surround us, awash in the slow flood of living. What can we say about what it means to stretch our skin around the day when each pore holds all the water? Walt, you were windy, but you knew, harbored by the streets that scuff the leather of your heart, how light against a window could give a room its sanctity, there in the noise of the men who were testifying. And I'll read one more poem before turning the podium over to my friend Larry. And this one is called Buzzards. Wrote this a few years back.
That's fitting.
Yeah, that's right. I'll leave the buzzards for Larry. No, the poem goes like this. You'd think at 50 I might know something about the way a car engine works, or might want to know. Gas and sparking, pistons, compression, the guy thing, or Piercig's balance between cruising and carburation. I tried to tune my Beetle years ago, pull at the belts, follow electrical wires. It didn't take. One of my college students tells me he hates poems. He can't make them make sense. I tell him he'll have to read poems to pass this course and get a degree. Maybe he can learn how to get behind the wheel, start the poem up, and find an image that can take him on down the road, leaving the buzzards to spiral along the refried roads, waiting for heat strokes or road kills, shimmering with symbolism. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Chip. One nice thing about tonight is you have two headliners. It was a rock star group. You'd have, basically they'd be double booked with two rock stars at the same stadium. So this is wonderful stuff. Very pleased to also introduce Larry D. Thomas. One of the beautiful things about Larry D. Thomas is that he's an honorary lifetime member of our group. And he achieved that before he ever became Texas Poet Laureate, I believe. Absolutely. So now, you should know, see, last year, Robin Davidson, I like to tell the story a lot. Robin Davidson read for us the week before she made Houston Poet Laureate. So we do believe there's a causal connection between being our featured poet and getting to be a poet laureate someplace. So absolutely. Everybody's going to get to come read for us. And so we're very excited. And we're also very honored to have one of our honorary lifetime members come join us. Larry's got a good long bio. I'm going to go through this, and I may make a few comments as I go through it, because it's really interesting. Because Larry, dear to my heart with this, had a life before he became a full-time poet. In 1998, he retired from that life, and he was had a career in social service and criminal justice, adult criminal justice. And he was a branch director of the Harris County Adult Probation Department in Houston, Texas. We should have, I would think, given him plenty of things to write about as he went along. But he had a disciplined practice of writing poems on weekends. And he did this for over 20 years. And even though he had a full-time job doing something else, he was a full-time poet and kept that up. And he maintained this discipline throughout these years. He was successful in a number of very respected journals. Among them are the Southwest Review, Poet Lore, the Cape Rock, the Small Pound Magazine Literature, the Chattahoochee Review, the Writers Forum, the Louisiana Literature, Puerto del Sol, the Texas Review, Borderlands, the Texas Poetry Review, and the Southwestern American Literature. And Texas Review, I believe that's the one Paul Ruffin. Yeah. He was my professor, my poetry professor, so I always loved the little connections that somehow develop in my life. Larry's first book came out in 2001, his first full book of collection of poetry, and it was a chapbook titled Lighthouse Keeper, put out by Timberline Press of Fulton, Missouri. And it was published in and it must have been beautiful, handset letter press with original lino-cut illustrations. And the volume was selected by the Small Press Review as a pick of the issue and quickly sold out 2 printings. Well, selling anything in poetry is an amazing thing. To sell out 2 printings is phenomenal. And I know some nationally award-winning poets who have a book and they're lucky sometimes if 50 gets sold. So this is an amazing thing. This is great. As he's gone through this, let's see, in his next book called Amazing Grace, which I've read, and I've given a couple of copies at our meeting that have been signed by Larry, and people really like it, was published by Texas Review Press in 2001. It's a full-length book of collection of poetry, and it was the winner of the Texas Review Poetry Prize. The collection also won the Western Heritage Wrangler Award, which is sponsored by the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And it was which is one of the top national awards granted annually to a collection of poetry which celebrates historical or contemporary American West. He has published 8 additional full-length collections of poems, several of which have received distinguished awards and prizes. Where Skulls Speak Wind, published by the Texas Review Press in 2004, received both the 2004 Texas Review Poetry Prize and the 2004 Violet Crown Book Award, which is from the Writers League of Texas, and which is also one of the top literary awards in Texas, granted annually for a full-length book of collection of poetry. Among the many honors and awards he's received for his poetry are a 2007 Poets Prize nomination for Stark Beauty, which is published by Westchester University and the Nicholas Roerich Museum. He has 6 Pushcart Prize nominations, a Best of the Net nomination, 7 Spur Award finalist citations from Western Writers of America, and the 2015 Western Heritage Wrangler Award. In the Texas legislature, and you can see why they did this, in 2007, they appointed him to be the 2008 Texas Poet Laureate. In 2009, he was inducted in the prestigious Texas Institute of Letters. I'm not even done. I want to tell you, this is how wonderful this is, and you're going to love this. Now, he was born and raised in West Texas, but he, of course, lived in Houston from the at age 20 and resided there from 1967 to 2011. And at that point, after retired, no, you had already retired, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, then he moved back in April 2011 to Alpine in far west Texas, with current reside. I think is there like a little enclave of poets? Because I've seen some other poets who live out there, like Darla McBride. Marfa, okay. Okay. And
Marfa, a little more than Alpine.
Okay. His first 3 book-length collections of poems were resonant with a strong sense of place, from West Texas, where he was born and reared, to Southeast Texas, the Gulf Coast, where he lived his entire adult life till the age of 64. And the subject of his subsequent poetry collections are diverse. They include outlaw bikers, ekphrastus poems, the avian world, an asylum for the criminally insane, which you might call the Gulf Coast poets sometimes, but anyway, that's okay. Yeah, as it goes. But we're good with that too. And the coast of Maine. So Thomas has published over 500 poems in distinguished literary journals in the United States, Mexico, China, Ireland, and Australia. Now, one reason he's here is because his most recent poetry collection As If Light Actually Matters, New and Selected Poem, is published by the Texas Review Press, which is now a member of the Texas A&M University Press Consortium. And this came out in 2005. And it is the most comprehensive and definitive volume of his poetry to date, containing selections from all 9 of his book-linked collections, selections from his chapbooks, and 40 poems not previously published in book form. Marvelous, marvelous. And this is quite a treat to have. And like I said, for both of you to be here, we're very excited about this. So I want to introduce you, Larry Thomas.
Thank you. I would like to thank David for that gracious and most kind introduction. I really appreciate it. I would like to thank Matt Riley and your wonderful program here off the page. And this is my 3rd appearance here, and each has been a highlight of my literary life. So thank you so much for having me. Most of all, I would like to thank all of my dear, dear friends in this audience. I've been in Alpine 5 years now, and I didn't realize I would have a form of amnesia when I moved out there, and I wanted to call Jerry Hamby and say, Jerry, can you meet me at Starbucks for coffee? Lisa said he's a day's drive away. But anyway, I'm so overwhelmed with joy to see so many of you. You look great. You've done real well without me. I'm going to read mainly from my new poems in this book because they've never been published in book form previously. Housefly. On an anvil of light, with the iron of iridescence, her weightless wings were forged. Death beguiles her so, she lays in what it claims her cherished eggs. She's the woman of the house of ubiquity. For her eyes alone, Picasso would have sold his tarring soul. Speaking of Picasso. Gecko. Thank you so much. Gecko. Those neat little spotted lizards that seem to find their way into the nooks and crannies of our lives. This was before Geico's Gecko. This has absolutely nothing to do with Geico. The silence of intractable shadow beguiles you. The pupils of your bulbous eyes are vertical ellipses. The adhesive discs of your toes allow you to scale glass without the slightest slip. You inhabit the dark interiors of our lives, traversing enclosed drawers, the cases of compact discs, navigating the thunder of Beethoven, the ink-black reaches of Scriabin. Light burns you like acid. Watch out for those geckos. Bobcat. This is an homage to beautiful East Texas, deep East Texas, and Southeast Texas. Deep in deep East Texas, after the pines have flung their shadows across the road like holy water, searing the flesh of a child possessed of the devil. After day dies and the moon's a ghoul, easing up the trees like luminous blight. After even the crows yield their calling to a storm-tossed sea of fear and terror, and after all sound is snuffed, save the muted pulse of animals, only then will he rustle on the dead leaf bed under the thicket, flex paws, silent as moon glow, soft as clouds, and set them one ever so imperceptibly before another, taking his place in the night. Munificence. The goatherd muses. Their udders house miracles of milk, butter, and cheese. Their dung is my fuel, their flesh my seldom meat. Their skins clothe me, with their bones I make my simple tools. Their horns are spoons, symbols of plenty. The walls of their bowels, sliced thinly into strips, serve as sutures, string cellos, violins. I wrote a chapbook, The Goat Herd, a couple of years ago, and it's about a farmer loosely based upon an actual farmer who lived in the Big Bend in the early 1900s. And one of my friends says, "I didn't know you raised goats." I said, "I've never owned a goat. I'm a poet." Rudyard's Pub, homage to Montrose, H-Town. How many of you have been to Rudyard's and swilled a brewski or two? It was just a block from my home of 24 years. Some say it's so authentically British, it must have been scooped intact from the heart of old London and shipped to its final resting place in the shadows of downtown Houston. The regulars flocked there every Thursday, assumed their designated stools at the bar, and watched the regular bartenders top frosted mugs with the amber heads of Guinness on draft, drawn with unctuous perfection. They keep the talk small, and they swill, snapping into place the last stubborn pieces of their puzzles, suturing their fractured lives with just a comfortable reach away, the whoosh and thud of darts penetrating the dense agave fibers of the dartboards, soothing as the sound of desire consummated. I don't have stock in Rudd's yet. Still saving my money. Sleepwalker, mindless, as if a chunk of night itself. He walks oblivious to destination and the momentary sanctuary of a home. The muscles of his legs are heated pulleys, snug against the wheels of darkness. In deep snow, in a world whose whiteness is broken but by the sudden blue shadow of an owl, he walks completely vulnerable to moon glow and the unforgiving rules of hunting. Though his eyes are open, he can't see. His ears twitch to the music of stars in deep space grinding on their axes. He trusts the cold, mute strangers of his feet. How many of your teachers or were teachers or plan to be teachers? Several. This is for you teachers. The teacher, when he imitates the blind reading Braille, though he himself can see, he closes his eyes, tilts his head back, places his index fingers side by side and sweeps them through the air as if conducting a score of music. He says most students, at least early on, get so hung up examining the anatomy of individual dots, it stifles their sedulous progress, that the most capable see their quavering fingertips as the slippered feet of dancers gliding over a floor of points to get the feel of pattern, dissolving the monotony of dots into washes of color. So what would we do without you teachers? Dark horse. My daughter's 46. God forbid, what does that make me? But in a trip to Houston, I think last year, she said, Dad, we were in her car, and she said, Dad, here's a song I would like for you to hear, and I hadn't heard it. And it was Katy Perry's Dark Horse. And I never knew Katy Perry could be so moving. And I thought, oh my God, and I was overwhelmed by the song, all of it. It was very well done. And I thought that night, Dina, would you like for me to write you a song titled Dark Horse? She said, can you? I said, we'll see. This is Dark Horse for Dina. The night is so black, it breathes. I feel your presence, but can't see you. I extend my arm into the darkness. Our fingertips meet. I grasp your hand and pull you to the back of the black beast I have straddled bareback. You lock your arms around my waist and lean your head into the wind. We are indistinct from the black night we ride into, the black night ravishing with us and the beast. We feel the bass drum heart of the beast beating with the pulse of each of us, 3 hearts beating with a single pulse, beating to the rhythm of a numinous song, the song of you, me, and the beast, quaking the black night with beautiful thunder. Thank you for your graciousness. Jewel. The reading of this poem I would like to dedicate to those of you who have overcome breast cancer. Men can get breast cancer too, believe it or not, so that's why I say those of you. Those of you who are fighting to overcome breast cancer, and those of you who may contract that dreadful disease someday. Jewel. When she lost her hair to chemo, she scarfed her head with black cloth, peppered with skulls, and joked that she was Jean Lafitte's last surviving relative. During the radiotherapy which followed, she mused the sun rising inside the dark, miraculous cells of her body, willing the cancerous ones to thin out and perish like clouds in the wide blue sky of remission. It's been 20 years since the young doctor clasped her hands and, in a soft, slightly breaking voice, diagnosed her cancer as terminal. Nightly, after spending another day as a volunteer at the hospice, she pours herself a glass of wine, eases her 80-year-old body gently onto the curved, dependable slats of her rocker, and fondles the dying day's minutes like diamonds in a jeweler's cloth. Thank you so much. Our Lady of Guadalupe, Mexico City, Mexico. The weight of a history scrawled in rivers of human blood has creased her face into folds of fleshed bronze. Little more than a slowly moving skeleton clad in black cloth. She's already traversed hundreds of feet of stone worn smooth by her ancestors, inching her pilgrimage in the hot Mexican sun toward the shrine. Stopping now and then, not for the cowardice of rest, but to strengthen the silver cage of her heart with yet another cross. Her life so sacrificed to her penitence, she uses her knees for feet. What a beautiful woman. I was privileged to see her when I visited Mexico City way back before most of you were born in 1978. And she stayed with me. I'm going to read a poem, Kimbell Art Museum, from my chapbook entitled Art Museums that Chip so graciously mentioned. Kimbell Art Museum, Fort Worth, Texas. Where is there another Fort Worth? Maybe Kansas, who knows, but this is Texas. Intrigued with the silver aspect of Texas light, the architect abhorred skylights and clerestory windows. Natural light enters through a 2 1/2 foot slit at the apex of vaulted ceilings, strikes convex perforated aluminum, reflects onto curved concrete, ricochets off walls of travertine and the warmth of an oak floor, merges with light from incandescent lamps, and illumes as if its oils were still wet with freshness and glowing from within. Latour's masterpiece, leaving the viewer complicit in the dazzling trinity of the cheat, the servant, and the courtesan. Sometimes more goes into the design and construction of a museum than the masterpieces it houses. How many of you are familiar with the marvelous muralist and painter John Biggers, who was, Jerry, I knew you would be, who taught for many years, I guess was essentially the art department at Texas Southern University. In my opinion, I went to a retrospective of his work at the Museum of Fine Arts, and I had no idea, about the scope of his work. But he's should be much, much better known on an international scale than he is. But this is inspired by one of his masterpieces, a painting of the shotgun houses in the 3rd Ward, and it's called Shotguns, 1987. Oil and acrylic on canvas by John Biggers. On the porches of cottages called shotguns, because all their rooms open one into the next in a line from front to back, allowing the pellets of a shell shot through the front door, unblocked passage through the back, stand 5 black women cradling dollhouse likenesses of their cottages. their faces resolute as carved African masks. The pots and tubs beside them herald the purity of the practical domestic acts of soap preparation, the cooking of pork, infant bathing, and even the catching of evil. The cottage's clapboard siding resonates with the corrugated surfaces of washboards or the rungs of ladders ascending the rows of gables stacked above the women in luminously outlined triangles, simultaneously 2 and 3 dimensional, all the way to the outstretched wings of birds, far below which, on Grandma's quilt, lie railroad tracks shimmering in the numinous geometry of the angels. And that doesn't begin to do that painting justice. Just tugs on the hem just a little bit. One more. The Old Man and the Sea, after, as you already know, Hemingway. The deck of his drifting boats, his last vestige of land. His eyes of deepest blue conspire with sea and sky to make even higher the icy cobalt flames of his hell. Beyond thirst and hunger, his brain raging in his skull a hurricane of tricks, his thoughts but feeble waves slapping against the door of death. He enters a windless calm, musing how each passing tick of the clock cuts another facet in the dazzling white diamond of his passage. Thank you so much.